the Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome, everybody. Whether you're watching this in the morning, in the afternoon, or in the evening, where I am in Thailand, you are welcome here in our digital space on Badlands Media, on Breaking History. And today, Gordon and I, Gordon being, I guess, a late morning, early afternoon person, me being 11 hours in the future, we'll be joined by somebody midway between our two opposing sides of the globe. A special guest who's going to be clocking in from Serbia, about 5 hours behind me, 6 hours ahead of Gordon. So we've got pretty much, most of the world here kind of covered, at least on this half of the globe. So that's kind of fun. Lots to talk about. How you doing, Gordon?
I'm great, man. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm doing all right. Yeah, we got a lot. I think before we really go into any of the nitty gritty, probably the best thing to do for a good measure would be a word from today's sponsor. So I'll just read through the ad for, what is it? It's River BTC. So let's just do that. Let's say, here we go. River announces Bitcoin interest on cash. Now US dollars in your River account will earn a high yield interest rate that can be paid in Bitcoin. With the price of groceries, mortgage, and tuition on a steep rise, people are now looking at a retirement age of 80 instead of 60. And it's all because dollars are losing value at a record pace. The challenge is finding a way to hold onto your dollar while still getting ahead. That's where River Bitcoin comes in. River Bitcoin's interest on cash protects your dollars with FDIC insurance while offering you the option to reap the potential gains of Bitcoin. Over the past 2 years, you would have earned 2 times the rate of high yield savings accounts and 16 times the rate of the national average savings accounts with Bitcoin interest on cash. Get started on badlandsmedia.tv/river. Move your cash to River today and start earning a real interest rate with Bitcoin. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. All right. That's cool. Oh, it's playing again. Why is it playing again? Let's stop that. Here we are. Nope, it's doing it again. Wow, what's going on?
I think you're good now.
Glitch in the system, but I think it's under control.
Okay. StreamYard's been acting weird lately. So.
Whoa. Okay. All right. We'll be on our guard. So today, look, we got a few major items to go through, but I thought that with a particularly, morose, dark. I mean, this anniversaries are usually something to be celebrated. However, in our current situation, not so much with this one. But March 24th, bombs began dropping onto a certain nation known as Yugoslavia that no longer exists in that form. And the balkanization process was begun, the thing that Zbigniew Brzezinski called for regarding the breaking up of the Soviet Union and specifically Russia, the destruction of the entire Russian culture and the busting up of Russia into a bunch of micronations built around micro-ethno-nationalist identities would be a really great divide to conquer strategy. And the starting point was Yugoslavia. And we've been told a certain story in the West about what the hell happened. Some people haven't even been told that story. Some people don't even know that NATO unilaterally bombed the hell out of a bunch of innocent civilians for over 2 months straight as part of that breaking of the will and the political system of a major part of the world. So I didn't know too much about that. I know you all, we both chatted briefly and laterally about that topic in previous episodes of the show. So we had a guest on. I figured, who better than a good friend of mine who I've known since 2019, Joaquin Flores, and he's been an observer, a watcher of this show, a fan of yours. I've noticed Joaquin's even shared a few of your items and has. I found that your mind and his mind have kind of resonated to a similar beat in a mode of analysis that I've appreciated quite a bit. So back in 2019, when I was still trying to find my my walking shoes in the geopolitical analytical world and looking for a way to sort of express what ideas I had in my head as I was working in a cubicle, hating my job and trying to figure out what the hell do I do. I submitted a few pieces to Joaquin, who was the editor-in-chief at the time of Fort Rus, fantastic geopolitical magazine, no longer exists, unfortunately, but it was great. And today, Yeah, and he published it, and we started chatting and started, developing a friendship. And I've been just, again, immensely impressed by his analysis. He's a color revolutionary expert, good finger on the pulse of world history, and somebody who now runs the New Resistance Telegram channel. It's a fantastic Telegram channel. Anyone can subscribe, listen to his almost daily briefings. They're very good. And I figured, well, let's just ask him to come on and participate in some chat and maybe deliver some insight into what the hell happened with Yugoslavia at this 25th or 26th anniversary of the bombing of Yugoslavia by NATO, the freedom-loving NATO. So without further ado, let's bring on Joaquin.
And hey, I'm here. All right. Yes. Thank you for the introduction. I was backstage in the green room and was able to pick it all up. So I appreciate the warm words, and I'm glad to be here with you, Gordon, and Matt.
Welcome, Joaquin.
Yeah, cool. I'm glad you guys are.
Wow. A couple of days ago marks the anniversary, 1999. These events they're still alive here. It's you don't just bomb a country and then people forget. And it is something that has been a part of not just people's lived experience. It's become part of the culture. Obviously, it dominates politics, very much to this very day, and it's when I first moved to Serbia like 15 years ago. So I my feet are here for some time. The thing that really impressed me, among many things about the Serbian people, one of the things that really impressed me is their vast knowledge. Like the average person on the street had vast knowledge of like global events, historical events, U.S. history. The average Serb could probably name more U.S. presidents than maybe the average American today under 25.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. So it's a really, really fascinating country. And as you said, the bombing was a huge event, and it went, between 70 and 80 days, and minimally 5,000 people were killed, civilians killed, minimally 5,000. And, many people suspect that this could be 3 times as much because both sides had an interest in lowering that, the Yugoslav government didn't want to look like they were failing to protect civilians, and obviously NATO and the US didn't want to make it look like too many civilians were dying. So, as many as 15,000, but I think officially it's claimed about 5,000.
Yeah, let's provide some context so people can get their bearings. So the 70 to 80 days that you're referring to is March 24th, 1999 to June 10th, 1999. And then just to provide some geographic context, this is Yugoslavia, circa 1990, I believe. And so you can see it's a large country that encompasses many current modern day European countries, including Slovenia, which is where Melania Trump is from.
Right.
And so you live in Serbia, is that correct?
Right. Yeah. It's so this was like 27 to 30 million people at one time, and many of its industrial economic productivity numbers were pushing beyond Germany at this time. And it was really the Germans, they were in this process, of reunification of Germany, like Anschluss 2.0. And so they kind of had, their appetites were growing with their imaginations. So you have this like reunification of Germany, and then this united Germany, really Western Germany. East Germans had a lot of sympathy with Yugoslavs, but West Germany really kind of had this different mentality. And with the Americans, they really went in, and it was a process from, going back, like, I don't want to propose that the Club of Rome is like necessarily formative of all policy, but it's a very good, temperature check of what elites at this time are thinking and trying to do. So the Club of Rome, as early as the 70s or early 80s, this is right around the time that Tito was dying or had died, they convened and they were like, we're going to take apart Yugoslavia. So this was like in the works
and
for
Tito,
like a decade.
Tito, for those who don't know, that's the president of Yugoslavia for like decades and decades, right? Since the 50s.
He was like the partisan hero that became, he was like the partisan anti-Nazi hero, codename Walter, that was like the, you know, the partisan leader that was celebrated and became the head of Yugoslavia for many decades. I think from, 1947 or 48, when they changed the name of the position until 1980, something like this. And he was a little guy, big heart, big orientation towards the world, but he was a little guy. And he, after his passing, there was really a power vacuum, and many historians and political historians and political theorists have speculated to what extent like Tito was pressured not to have a clear plan of leadership after his death. In other words, like, so long as you don't make continuity plans, then we're fine. Because what happens afterwards with no clear successor, so to speak, is you kind of have a decentralized leadership emerge out of the communist leadership. And there really wasn't anyone like Tito, again. And there's lots of good historical documentation about the CIA and German intelligence operating in Yugoslavia. They were really targeting, you would call it soft power centers. They were really targeting, how would you say, music and rock music in particular. So there's like a little story about when the Yugoslav authorities actually realized that that things were too late, is when they were, I guess no one was doing their job, right? But they were listening to Croatian radio, and they were listening to the lyrics of the songs, and like the lyrics of the songs were like in code, like slang from the Ustasha about killing Serbs. And this is like within Yugoslavia. This is like before the Civil War began. So It was like at this time that they realized that the Croatian national intelligence, because there was, there's the federal, and then there was like the state police, state intelligence of each country within Yugoslavia, so to speak, right? So they realized that the Croatians were like on their own agenda, probably for some time, had gone, had split off and were doing some other operation with the Germans, counter Yugoslav Central Authority. So that was kind of like the music was a huge part of this. And there's a musician in Croatia who was a huge pop musician, and he was an open neo-Nazi, just like you have in Ukraine today, just like in Ukraine. And his name was Thompson, named after the Thompson machine gun. And it just sounds like pop music. It's not like metal or rap or punk or anything caustic. It's just like pop music. It sounds like, nice rock. And but the words are crazy, the words are nuts. So that was Thompson. Yeah, there was a lot of things going on in that decade before the actual fighting, broke out. And then there were like a lot of things, of course, that popped up, when the fighting started. But you can see, like in this map of Yugoslavia that you have here, you can see that in Serbia, there's a part to the north called Vojvodina and a part to the south called Kosovo. And these were autonomous regions within administrative Serbia. So there's like some, this is easier to explain, and we won't like get caught up in it, but like this is easier to explain than, some other countries that are, this is pretty straightforward. So the entities of Yugoslavia were Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. Within Serbia was also Vojvodina and Kosovo. And there's a reason for that also got into how things devolved and fell apart. because even though we associate like Belgrade as the capital of Yugoslavia and Belgrade as the capital of Serbia, and therefore we might imagine, like, for example, that Serbia is the successor state of Yugoslavia, that is a fact in terms of the political decentralization that occurred over time. That is true. But what is not really well explained typically is that when Yugoslavia was a socialist, like Marxist country, they were part of the non-aligned movement, and they were not part of the Warsaw Pact, and they were part of the Balkans alliance that included Turkey. So it was like an offshoot of NATO-ish, sort of, and Greece.
But a more neutral idea of,
neutral.
I mean,
it was non-aligned. It was more neutral. They were not part of NATO, to be clear. They were not part of NATO. They in fact, Tito was one of the founders of the non-aligned movement, with Nehru and others. So when you have, very interestingly, what you'll see is that, like, Croatia has, in Croatia that you see on the map, there are Serbian areas, and closer to the border of Vojvodina, and Bosnia, and in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you have a whole area of Serbs, and then you have a whole other area in Bosnia Herzegovina that clearly are Bosniak Muslims, and others that are Croatian, right? But what you find is that Serbia in particular was sort of like identified as the problem country, that a socialist Yugoslavia was kind of founded on the idea that Serbia was kind of bad and that everyone else was kind of good. It's kind of weird because it's kind of counterintuitive, but at issue was that, Serbia, northern Serbia, and at times parts of Serbia and Croatia and Slovenia, etc., were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And in the history of Marxism, what's really interesting, people know about Lenin and the Third International, but there was the Second International before that, and the Marxism that was legal Marxism, that was like allowed as parliamentary opposition Marxist, like socialist parties in the Austro-Hungarian world, were legitimated. But one of the things that they had to say was that the Austro-Hungarian occupation and presence in Serbia and Croatia was good because it was the Serbs that were oppressor nation. That actually the Austro-Hungarian Empire was saving the Croats, the Slovenes, etc., from Serbian chauvinism or Serbian domination. So that carried forward into socialist, Marxist-Leninist Yugoslavia, that Serbian chauvinism was like the thing to keep in check. So they divided. They divided Serbia. They took away Kosovo. They took away Vojvodina, even within the Yugoslavia. But you don't see those same administrative, where you would see that there's other ethnicities, is my point, in Croatia or Bosnia. But they were there, and that would come to light later with the Dayton Accords in '95 and so forth, and as the war progressed. But yeah,
interesting.
Yeah. I got a quick question for you. So the map that we're seeing right there, as far as the current configuration of nations carved out of the former Yugoslavia, were they all created at the same time, or what defined the configuration of those borders?
Yeah. So you're saying the way that they broke apart, like what order, kind of, or
what ordering? And also a question I have in my mind is, what was used to validate the bombing campaign begun in 1989 in the first place? Like, what was being said that justified that bombing of Yugoslavia?
So okay, those two questions. Right. Good questions. Yeah. So if I recall correctly, it was Slovenia and Macedonia withdrew from Yugoslavia first, and it was non-incidental. It was like a peaceful withdrawal. The negotiations on how Croatia and Bosnia would withdraw led to conflict and ultimately the war that we had. So that went on for a number of years, and then at a certain point there was a ceasefire and a separate ceasefire and conclusion to a part of the conflict in 95, and that was most of it with the Dayton Accords, and that really resolved the question of Bosnia-Herzegovina, but then with Kosovo. The U.S. policy and the NATO policy was to break Kosovo out of Serbia completely. So that's really what led to, there was actually a number of demands that the U.S. was making on Milosevic's government. And this was over the years. And it would be like every time they came, they would have more demands, like concede this, concede that, privatize this, allow this company to come in, allow this human rights NGO to come in, and so forth. So it was, chipping away at their sovereignty, like by 1,000 cuts. So every time that they would meet with the Americans, they knew that there was going to be something that they'd be asked to be giving up. So, at one point, the Serbs say, listen, just give us the whole list of the things that you want us to do so that we can implement this in a strategic way that makes sense. Like if we know what the whole picture looks like, then we can work together on what we implement first, second, what order or to what extent and when. And the Americans go, oh no, you don't seem to understand. You see, the list never ends. And at that point, they realized that it was going to, be a direct war against NATO. And so you had the U.S. go in and militarily occupy the Kosovo. And there was a almost near conflict with the Russians who also came in. This was a very strange time. This is right at the cusp between the transition between Yeltsin and Putin. And this was really the final months of Yeltsin, actually. So if you actually compare when, what's happening, basically Putin creates the FSB. He begins to, many people would say, kind of run the show behind the scenes, and Yeltsin is still kind of the front man. But ultimately, the Russians deliver very strange communications that are parroted by CNN at the time, I remember, and Western news, New York Times in general. They were like, Russians are going to come in as U.S. allies in the peacekeeping, blah, blah, blah. But the Russians were actually sending in something independently and towards a different direction. And
that was Yeltsin, you said, or Putin?
Yeah, so Yeltsin was officially in power, but Putin was already probably in power. But he definitely was already, they had already recently made the FSB, and Putin was already the head of the FSB, and he was just, this was in June or July of 1999, and then he would officially become the president or whatever in December of 1999. But those months before was the transition from Yeltsin to Putin, and we saw very clearly that Putin got very involved at the very end in Yugoslavia and actually changed some outcomes for the best. It was when the Russian paratroopers, they first went to confront the Americans in Kosovo. They had a near shootout or small exchange of fight at the airport. Then they deconflicted, and they reached a political solution. And the Russian army went north to Belgrade. And when the Russian army went to Belgrade, it forced the U.S. to stop bombing Belgrade. Because they weren't going to bomb the Russian army in Belgrade.
Wow.
So that's how the bombing ended. It wasn't out of the good heart of Clinton or something. It was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so here's a map that I think kind of breaks down what you were explaining earlier. So 1989, the red is Yugoslavia, And then 1991, you mentioned that Slovenia, Croatia,
And Macedonia, yeah, that's right.
Break away. So the red is still Yugoslavia. And
Right.
then by 1999, when this war we're talking about breaks out, the green is now Bosnia, Herzegovina.
Right.
Yeah. And then 2008 is you have Montenegro. And then they have a different shade of pink to kind of signify Kosovo.
Yes, that's it.
In the south of Serbia. At this point, it's called Serbia. But yes, so
you can see it there, and then look at the green part. See, there's like a squiggly, like light green line through Bosnia Herzegovina.
Yeah.
So that separates the Bosnia Herzegovina. This is a little bit weird. So within Bosnia Herzegovina, there's two entities. They're not Bosnia and Herzegovina. Like I would always think that the two entities would be Bosnia and Herzegovina. No. So in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's two entities. There's Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then there's Republika Srpska. So the one on the left, the one that doesn't touch Serbia at all, is Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the one on the right that borders on Croatia on the top and Serbia on the side, that's Republika Srpska, which means, Serbian Republic. So we say it in Serbian, even in English, to not confuse for the Republic of Serbia, capital Belgrade,
Yeah, and this is important for people listening right now. This is such an important thing to keep in mind, not just because it's the anniversary. That's obviously the instigating factor of this conversation. But right now, geopolitically, you have the person who is, I think he's the president, Milorad Dodik. Is he the president of Srpska?
Yes.
Right? The Republic of Srpska, who has been they're literally, I mean, as somebody who is largely a relatively sane pro-Russian voice, somebody who's called for peace and de-escalation on numerous occasions, that is intolerable to the technocratic assholes who are running the European Commission. And basically, somehow, maybe you could explain this, he has been told that he faces charges now, criminal charges even, that might involve him going to jail possibly because some German high representative doesn't like him and says he must.
Gordon,
what's going on there, man? What is this?
This is happening right now. That's right.
Yeah.
This is we're using this anniversary, but there are things, this is still going on. This is like a conflict, and it's like had this cold phase, but see, the European Union, nor the US, nor NATO control Belgrade. They have a lot of influence. There's a lot of controls, plural, but they cannot claim to control it outright. And I don't know if this is psychological, geopolitical, or whatever, but you can't control the Balkans if you don't control Belgrade. And so it's kind of like the Lone Star State or something. It's kind of like it's surrounded by NATO and EU countries, and Serbia is in neither. So it's like a holdout, you know what I mean? It's like the Alamo or something. So it's like you've got this you can see in the green country Bosnia Herzegovina, like that division came about from 95 in the Dayton Accord, and the Serbs on the ground had a strong advantage militarily, and it was not a bad agreement. Like Dayton is not a bad agreement per se. I mean, it's a draw. So the Serbs, really fought to a draw against superior supported forces and really NATO proxies, and they got the Dayton Accord, which wasn't bad. So what's happening now is in part of the Dayton Accord, though, this became the UN Security Council resolution on the question of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the language in this is pretty clear. There's supposed to be someone called an Office of the High Representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is supposed to be appointed by the UN Security Council. And you can see that that's the language there in the original UN Security Council. But over time, the Germans and the Americans have basically, when several past high representatives retired, they didn't go through the process of conference and agreement with the UN SC on who the next high representative would be. So they've just appointed him unilaterally, even though this document, the UN Security Council document, came into force with a co-authorship of Russia and some other countries that have not had any input on the status of the UN the high office from the UN, the high office for Bosnia. So basically, it's a dictatorship from Germany. The currency used in Bosnia and Herzegovina is the convertible mark, which has the identical value of like, if you have marks, like German marks from before the euro, you know how you can still sometimes go to a bank and get, you don't see them again, but you can get marks for them. You can get euros for them. That's the exchange rate. So in other words, Germany still knows what the value of their mark is separately from the European euro by the value of the convertible mark in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So they still use German marks in that. So it's a colony of Germany. And so Schmidt is a German politician. He's not an expert in Yugoslavia. He's not a former neutral politician or cabinet member or somebody from Germany. He's a German politician that has a particular anti-Serbian political ideology because he's from a political party, right? This is not just an operative or a manager or like a diplomat or something like that. So he's a partisan. He's anti-Serbian, very racist anti-Serbian. And so what's happening now is, like you were saying, that they had the arrest warrant for Dodik now, which is just bonkers. And basically, there's a constitution of the entire Bosnia and Herzegovina. You'll see on the map, I didn't want to introduce another complication in the explanation, but you can see that the part that's Bosnia and Herzegovina is called the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is also really misleading because actually the whole country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, is a federation because it's truly decentralized, because it includes Republika Srpska. And then, of course, you have the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? You would think that would be the green entity there, but it's the other way around.
Up here in the north.
Yeah, you can see that the whole thing is actually called Bosnia and Herzegovina. But yeah, you can see that Republika Srpska is divided. They inserted this Brčko district is a very bad outcome of the Dayton Accord, specifically so that the Serbs didn't have a conjoined land, so that to make it non-contiguous. And then there's also, just to trade that off, that's the real point, is to make it non-contiguous. And then you can see there's a little bit of Bosnia Herzegovina above Republika Srpska there.
Yeah,
so,
right here.
So wait, who controls that district? Where does that belong that breaks up the two Sprskas?
Brčko district is directly controlled by Sarajevo. It's kind of like a federal district, so to speak. It's not controlled by either Republika Srpska or... Well, what we do I know I don't want to like make it dumb, but what we normally do in the parlance is we refer to the whole country as Bosnia and Herzegovina. Then when we're talking about the green part, we call it the Muslim Croat Federation. That's not a negative word. That's just the history. It used to be called the Muslim Croat Federation, and then Republika Srpska. So the Muslim Croat Federation. What you see in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina there is like a checkerboard of different cantons. Some are Muslim and some are Catholic. I mean, this whole thing is like Dr. Seuss's Butter Battle Book. I mean, the Serbs, the Croats, and the Bosnian Muslims, they eat the same food. They sing the same songs. They look the same. I mean, they look like identical twins. They're often related. Sometimes religion changes happen in the past 50 or 100 years. I mean, these are really, in my opinion, and this is not an opinion that many people share, because I'm like an outsider looking in. I'm like seeing the forest from the trees. I'm like, like Lutheran Germans, Catholic Germans, Protestant Germans, they all speak the German language. They're all German, But in this region, everyone speaks Serbian, but some people want to call it Serbo-Croatian or whatever. But we all agree that it's the same language, whatever you call it. So Bosnians, Serbs, Croats, Montenegrins, they all speak the same language. And They sing the same songs. They have the same jokes. And in the Yugoslav period, they have all the same cultural TV pop references and stuff, you know, for like 70 years or whatever, or 50 years. So it's,
well, that's an interesting, you know, like insight that you share, because, you know, I'm 36 years old. So I grew up, as I mentioned to y'all before the show started, like in middle school and high school, I actually had friends from Bosnia who were Bosnian who came over to America as a result of this conflict. One of them actually, who I played soccer with for many years, spent a year, him and his dad, like living in bombed out buildings, like without electricity or plumbing, and like sneaking around to escape the country. So they're in like a really, really bad part of it. So this is something that when y'all said you want to do this subject, I was very interested in learning more about it. But the other part of it is what you just mentioned about the Muslim Croat district. My generation, being I was 13 when 9/11 happened, so we were psyoped basically into looking at the world in a very, very reductive, simplistic way, where it's like the West is Christian, the East is Muslim, and you know, it's like unheard of for there to be Muslims in Europe. But the fact of the matter is when you look at the history of Eastern Europe, going all the way back to the you know, the Mongols coming over, and then you had the Caliphate. There were Muslims all over the, Eastern Europe that integrated into those societies thousands and thousands of years ago, and then would ally with the Christians to actually fight the other Muslims who were coming to attack. I mean, it's such a convoluted, for lack of a better word, history that is very nuanced and requires a lot of understanding to fully grasp. But the way my generation is taught the history is that Europe is Christian, the Middle East is Muslim. Those are two separate things. They can't be integrated. They can't be there's very little gray area. And it's such a disaster, like the way that it's taught to people. And, you know, anyone who's in their mid 30s or younger really does not have, and I can't speak for people who are older, obviously, but they don't have a real understanding, I think, of how nuanced the world is and how the world was pre 9/11. It's fascinating.
Yeah, people actually, you know, got along. And and so what happens is that people wanted peaceful separation, and the Serbs and the Bosnian Muslims, we call them, they're called Bosniaks to clarify, but you know, Bosnian Muslims or Bosniaks are were just like Serbs. They don't want any war. They're normal people. But there had been the certain countries connected to NATO were building up radicalism all around. But no one gets a pass here. Like the Serbs, no one gets a pass. Like, this is not about good guys and bad guys. This is about a tragedy that happened to all these people. And it's true that the Serbs were clearly the most opposed to NATO, and where they wound up. You know, clearly they were the ones that to this day are the most opposed to NATO and the EU because of this. But, you know, the rise of Milosevic within the Communist Party was also a Western project to a certain extent, because, you know, the way to break up Yugoslavia was to have everyone latch on to kind of a religious ethnicity definition. So even though it's true that you had like Ustaša revivalism in Croatia, you had a very Muslim Brotherhood influenced rise of Salafism, in fact, among the Bosniaks. You had the radical Albanian groups, you know, that were, you know, very similar to the IRA in terms of their, you know, methods of car bombs and stuff like this. IRA in Ireland, you know, all of these, but the Serbs also, like Milosevic was, instead of promoting, you know, pan-Slavism or pan-Yugoslavism, even though it was called Yugoslavia, the political forces that were surrounding him and that he, you know, whether default or created, the U.S. definitely approved that he had gone to banking school in the West. They definitely approved of many things. You know, he had a Western understanding of banking and finance and business, Milosevic. So, you know, using Serbian nationalism and Serbian and the Orthodox religion was, I'm not trying to say these are all equal, but you have to, that's why I wanted to mention at the very beginning was that in the Austro-Hungarian and, you know, basically like Slovenian and Croatian and some people in Vojvodina like mentality, you know, the Serbs were the bad guys from the old days, like from 100 years ago. So, you know, even though like we know that there's no like Serbian, like the Serbian Orthodox Church is not connected to like the things that the Roman Catholic Church is connected to. I love Catholics, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying as a fact, during, you know, like the Serbian nationalist tradition is connected like to the anti-German, anti-Nazi, you know, partisan movement and the Chetnik movement as well. So there's a different thing. But if you were Croatian or you were Slovenian, right, and you see Serbian nationalism, even though I think more internationally minded people would see the Serbian nationalism as the most benign out of compared to what was happening, from the perspective of Croatians and others, they would be like, oh, it's the bad Serbs again. So, but there was a
question on that point. Yeah, I got a quick question. So what is it, and either real or imagined, what's the story? You know, the Armenians did a genocide, you know, at a certain point over a century ago. How much of that story carries weight or not, I don't even know anymore. I'm confused. But point is, there's a certain story that scared the hell out of the Croatians and adjacent people around Serbia, that Serbia was the bad guy. How much of it? What is that story? Is it based upon facts that Serbia did carry out abuses, or is it based on myth making? What is that story? Like what is that causes fear?
Yeah, it's both. It's both. I mean, you know, basically, as the Austro-Hungarian Empire was waning in power, there was a vacuum in the region, and there was also the pinnacle of like political pan-Slavism. That's where like the red, white, and blue tricolor flag comes from that you see in so many Slavic countries. So the pan-Slavic movement was big, and there was agreement among primarily Croatian royalty and elites and Serbian royalty and elites to make a kingdom of Yugoslavia, and that the king was Serbian. So they made it so the first Yugoslavia was a kingdom of Yugoslavia with a Serbian dynasty. And so that was the outcome of like this pan-Slavism movement, you know, 1.0. And then like socialist Yugoslavia is like 2.0. So from 1.0, you had different, like, there had been a time in history where where Kosovo was mostly Serbian, and then you had like ethnic changes, and you had an increase of Albanian population, and then in World War I, the Serbs were able to like manage to reassert that it's Serbian, and then during the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. So then like when Tito comes into power and it's like socialist Yugoslavia, the idea is, yeah, the Serbs were kind of the bad guys. Even though Serbs come from Kosovo, the Albanians are there now in the majority, so they should have a lot more autonomy, and the Serbs were bad. So this view is also reinforced in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Like, just to be clear, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a huge and powerful empire that extended into Romania and, you know, Ukraine and many other places, and the whole northern part of Yugoslavia was Austro-Hungary. So their narrative that justified their imperialism was that they were protecting those people from bad Serbs. But like evidence of bad Serbs was more just kind of like, you know, racism or casual prejudice and just kind of like haterism. And again, like when the Serbs had the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, there you go. When the Serbs had the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, there was maybe some Austro-Hungarian influence in other people's minds in the Yugoslavia that, oh, this is true. So, but anyway, this is Austro-Hungary. So you can see what happened. So you can see that the Belgrade was just the frontier between Serbia and Austro-Hungary. So you can see how small Serbia and how big Austro-Hungary is. And the Austro-Hungarian Marxist narrative, and why I'm saying it was not that the Austro-Hungarian Empire was Marxist. You understand that they had liberal reforms and they had a parliamentary system, and there were socialist parties that had Marxist views and Marxist historians. And so the Marxist view became the partisan view. Instead of being like Lenin influenced as strong in Tito's Yugoslavia, Austro-Hungarian ideas about the national question and which people were oppressed and who was oppressing who. Like this oppressing nations discourse is like a really big deal in Marxism. So like that's a whole part of the discourse in there, like built in. So that was kind of used to make the Serbs be the bad guys. Austro-Marxism is basically, yeah.
And just to give everyone a little more context about this, so the green is the Austria-Hungary, and the 19th century is really what we're talking about here. 18th century as well, but 19th century primarily. And the three major powers, this would have been the second largest country in Europe after Russia, the third most populated country in Europe after Germany and Russia. And really, when we say Germany, we're really talking about Prussia. And so the three major powers in Eastern Europe at the time, Central and Eastern Europe really, were Russia, Prussia, and Austria-Hungary. And they had a series of conflicts and alliances and treaties and back and forth that carved up Poland at the end of the 1700s, the latter half of the 1700s, and that actually contributed to the creation of America. We went into that on the 4th of July, I think a few years, maybe this year, last year. Yeah, and it ties into the Pale of Settlement. It ties into the World War I, the creation of the German Empire at the end of toward the end of the 19th century, and then Prussia turning into the German Empire, the First Reich, as you would call it, and then ultimately World War I. It kind of helped set the stage for that because at the end of World War I, you no longer had this country; it was carved up, and then the term balkanization, I believe, comes from the conflict we're talking about right now, right? The 1999. Yeah. So like that's a term you hear thrown around a lot. The balkanization of America, potentially the balkanization of whatever country, and that just means the country being carved up into smaller territories, and it's referring to the exact conflict we're talking about right now in 1999. That's right. And I like the two things that I think of listening to you explain this is I think of what happened at the end of World War I, where they carved up the Middle East, the way that Africa, generally speaking, was carved up in a very haphazardly way, where basically like ruler lines were drawn across the map. Right. This seems to have been like what happened in 1999 seems to have been done in a much more sloppy manner, like much more callously than even it was done at the end of World War I in the Middle East. To a certain extent, to the extent that there wasn't enough consideration given to maybe the people on the ground. And then the other thing that I think of besides World War I is I think about what's happening right now in Ukraine, because you mentioned Putin. You talked about him coming into power. He did a great 4-part interview with Oliver Stone. I don't know if y'all have seen that. I think it was between, I want to say maybe 2015 and 2017. He met with Oliver Stone 4 times, and they did like an interview. It was like a 1 hour. It ended up being like a 1 hour documentary in each part. It was like a 4-hour series, and he explains like everything, like him coming into power, the from his perspective, what he was trying to accomplish, and the way he tells the story is he says that he was trying to reconcile with the West. He was trying to, bury the hatchet from the Cold War. He wanted to get along with the West. He was trying to find opportunities to collaborate on things. I think the one thing he really wanted to do was develop a ballistic missile defense system that George Bush Sr. rejected, even though George Bush Jr. was in office at the time. He said it was the father that told him to pounce.
Tells you a lot about that one.
Yeah. I mean, that tells you who was really running the show in the early 2000s. But so when he comes in and because effectively what he does to end this war in Yugoslavia, as I understand it, is he kind of sided with America and told the army that the combatants that they needed to lay down their arms and make peace, and basically said, like, we're not going to back you. Like, you need to make peace. And that kind of set like a precedent almost for NATO then coming in later in 2008, right, Matt, in Georgia. And then they were trying to stir up trouble in Georgia, right?
Yeah, my internet crapped out. I just jumped right back in as you asked me that question. So I don't know what
you're saying, like that that NATO went in and created problems in Georgia in 2008.
Yeah. It's like NATO, like when Putin sides with the West in the Yugoslavian war in 1999 and tells the Yugoslavian army to lay down their arms and make peace. It almost sets like a precedent, because NATO basically wins that conflict, right? I mean, NATO is like the winner of the conflict. Those countries that are Balkanized are now all part of NATO. And then all of a sudden, what is it? 9 years later, we then get a similar situation. And this is where I kind of want to get some of your insights as well, Joaquin, about like color revolutions, because then the same thing starts to happen in Georgia, and Putin is forced to deploy troops to preemptively defend against NATO trying to come in and stir up trouble again. Right. And then like right now, what we're dealing with, we've talked about it on this show many times, the Georgian parliament has been trying to join NATO against the wishes basically of the people and against the interests really of the people, because it's going to just invite more conflict and war to the region.
Yeah, that's the long and short of it. It's what's happening right now is that we've just had this amazing thing happen in the U.S. where they shut off almost all the USAID stuff that was funding a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of things going on in the U.S. that provide, I think, realistic grounds for optimism and actually seeing results already. With what's happening now with the Trump administration. I think, we just talked about Dodik in Republika Srpska, and he was just, I guess a couple of weeks ago, he had Rudy Giuliani come, and they had a very long talk, and Giuliani was representing Trump informally, of course, at this level, and Dodik was there with his MAGA hat, and he's been a big Trump supporter for a couple of years, maybe like 6 years, Dodik. And he said that if Trump got reelected, and sworn in, that he would be moving forward to separate Republika Srpska from Bosnia. And this is because of all these years of all of this illegal orders from Christian Schmidt from Germany, who basically usurps the power of any court, judge, legislature, or president there in Bosnia. And his word is like God. And so people reject that. And so it's not that this problem now is not happening because Dodik wants to separate. The problems have been boiling for so long that even before Trump was elected, he could see that, if Trump gets elected, we might have the political support we need from America to separate from Bosnia, or to straighten Sarajevo out.
And based on that, like, Serbia as well is I don't know if you guys touched on this while my internet crapped out. If you did, and I apologize, but Serbia is also a hot spot right now. There's been attempted color revolution.
Yeah, color revolution. Yes, yeah. I meant to
people
mention
would say
that.
otherwise, right? People's advocate. Some people might say, "Oh, it's a legitimate anti-authoritarian people's movement to bring in democracy against Alexander Vucic." That's what some people who should know better would say.
Yeah,
but
no, I know. People that
uh,
know better is very well put. Yeah.
Doesn't smell that way to me.
Huh? So what's going on right now? I mean, how does Vucic play into what Dodik? Are they on the same page?
They're on the same page. Yeah, they're on the same team.
Yeah.
They're on the same team.
Okay. And I noticed that what's a lot of the anti-NATO Vucic haters have been saying is that they'll point out nice things, polite things that Vucic has said at different times to NATO technocrats or whatever, and that's what they'll always do, right? That's the formula. Trump went to the World Economic Forum, so
right.
But
I mean, the truth is that when you read Politico,
why is Vucic earned the ire of the color revolutionaries or the organizers of this? What's going on the ground from somebody there? What? Yes, can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah. So, let's remember that this is a politically sophisticated country where, like, a lot of people understand geopolitics. People know very clearly that, like, Vucic and Dodik like Putin, that Putin likes them. And they also see that they are getting good relations going with Trump, not with Biden, not with Democrats, not with neocons, just Trump. Like, so that's a very important thing. Like, in terms of the very basics, it's like Trump, Dodik, Vucic, Putin. That's like, they basically all have enough more in common on what they see the situation is than anyone else. So those four minds think the closest on these questions. So that might help people orient, what we're talking about. So the forces against, there are real problems in Serbia. Okay, there are real problems in Serbia when we had the pandemic, when the inflation across Europe, and that inflation has stayed. And then we actually had a lot of economic growth, and we actually had a lot of things that were good at the same time, because we were able to buy property. We were able to buy oil from and other assets from Russia, because at very competitive prices, because we didn't go into the sanctions against them. So this has been going on, like the sanctions, for like 3 years now. And so, on paper, the economy is doing really well. And I don't doubt, that, but that's not the same thing as how people are living, right? So when the war in Ukraine started, we took in like 300,000 families from Russia and Ukraine, mostly Russia. And this was largely because of the sanctions didn't allow businesses to operate in Russia. But Russians themselves can't just get EU residency. So in Serbia is not part of the EU and not under this type of sanctions that Russia is under. So like 300,000 families, so it comes out to about 800,000 individuals moved to Serbia. And our population was only 7 million at the time, or 6.5 million. So now we've got like 7.5 million people. That's a lot more people. And they all basically moved to Belgrade. They didn't move to like villages or anywhere else. So like there's been a huge rent and housing inflation, like rent inflation, business rents have gone up, because all of these Russians that came are entrepreneurs. That's why they're here. Maybe a couple of people that didn't want to be mobilized, or, had made former military that had agreement to re-enlist if there was a crisis, and they didn't want to do that. Maybe some of them, but most of them were entrepreneurs. And anyway, so we have a lot of issues here. But the thing is that the main issues are really housing costs, utilities, I know these are big ones, right? Housing costs, utilities, and food costs, right? But here's the rub, is that those are things that the government can do things about. And also those are tangible things that people experience and can measure. So those aren't very good things to organize a color revolution about, even though they're real issues. So instead, you have the issues are very abstract, like corruption or just things that people imagine, or fake news. A lot of fake news, and a lot of people are under 30 or under 20, and they don't really know their own history. Like when I moved here 15 years ago, I even realized I was just buying time, you know? So like, I've seen the cultural shift. I've seen the rise of, smartphones. Used to be that people all made eye contact and, every people pass, dobar dan, but now people kind of in their phones. So the culture has changed and kids are becoming more neurotic. Testosterone levels are starting to drop off a little in men. There's a lot of weird things going on that you see in the West for a couple of decades now. And now it's happening in Serbia. So a lot of the young people, they just get told stuff. Like they think that it was this government that gave away Kosovo. Well, Kosovo was never given away. But when Kosovo declared independence, it was the other government. It was the opposition guys, you see. But young people don't know this. They just see a meme or a headline from fake news, and they go, oh, that's it. So CNN is fake news. And CNN is the biggest opposition supporting channel in the country, CNN. It's called N1. You go on the website, you see the CNN bug right there, though. So it's the same editorial, and it's they're enemy of the people. So people here just think that it's true. They just, N1 said it. And if you challenge them, they're like, oh, I don't get it from N1. It's like, oh, you got it from N1. Like, that's why you think that, And so it's basically, we have a VDS. It's like Bitchute derangement syndrome. Yeah. And, people polarize it because the question is like whether the whole state should be brought down, right? That's really the question. Is there corruption? Yeah. I mean, do people breathe? Do they eat? Do they shit? Do they fart? Is there corruption? Yes, but does that mean that you destroy your state? Like, does that mean that you destroy the institutions and become further balkanized and lose Vojvodina and lose There's other parts too they can break off too that aren't on the map. They have a whole other, it's basically just Belgrade and the surrounding area called Trem and another area called Šumadija, and that's it. And the rest of it, they just want, to be balkanized in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's probably factions in the globalist regime that would like to see that happen because it probably makes them easier to assimilate into, then centralize into like one giant European Union district. Right. And I mean, this is the reality of they have everybody, they're conditioning everybody to have these short attention spans, so they don't really understand what is happening. But the map on the left is NATO prior to the war we just talked about. And then the map on the right is NATO prior to Putin invading Ukraine in 2022.
Oh, thank you for putting this map up, Gordon, because you see in 2022, see how Bosnia is also not in NATO?
Yep.
It's because Dodik, as president of Republika Srpska, has veto, like all the presidents do, like the president of the Muslims, the president of the Croats, and the president of the Serbs, each have veto over things that would be binding treaties. So the other reason that they want to strip Republika Srpska of its identity is because they keep vetoing NATO ascension.
This is probably this is a kind of a hard map to convey, but I mean, so you can see like the different gradations of pink here. The yellow designates countries that have applied, so they're applying to join. And so the darkest red, that's 1948, the original NATO. And then between 1950 and 1996, it's 46 years. There were only 4 countries that joined: Spain, Germany, Greece, and Turkey. And I think, as I understand it, I think almost all those countries joined like in the 50s. I think Turkey, I know Turkey joined in like 1952. Germany may have been around the fall of the Berlin Wall. I'd have to check.
Yeah, Germany was out for a long time. It was
Germany may have been in the 90s, but Turkey was certainly like one of the earliest members. I'm not sure about Spain, but they were neutral in World War II technically. But you can see like we were like, so there's Bosnia. Bosnia is application to join. Serbia is not in. Bosnia is application to join, but not in. And then I was showing earlier, so like the connection I was making earlier was the war in 1999 in Yugoslavia and the 2008 war in Georgia. And if you look at this map, so here, like I just drew a line from the capital of Serbia to the capital of Georgia. I mean, you're encircling Russia. That's what the whole point is. The whole point is to encroach. And now all of a sudden they're moving all the way across the Black Sea and they're trying to get guys over. They're trying to get countries over here in the Caucasus to join NATO. They don't even have like any sort of proximity to the Atlantic Ocean, and they're trying to get them to join NATO.
It doesn't even make sense.
It doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense.
Just dream the impossible dream. It's like
and then they call Putin a madman for defending himself, for defending Russia. It's like
I want to know why Russia has itself like on all sides close to NATO's border. That's the
yeah. Like who does Russia think they are? Like moving their borders so close to NATO, right? But like the thing is they'll do this stuff and then their friends and they are their friends, their allies, they're puppets really. In the media on N1 or CNN or whatever station it is, even Fox News, will come out and say, you're insane if you question this. If you even ask questions about this, like, are you insane? Like, it's always been like this. I mean, it's so Orwellian. It's they brainwash you, and then when you ask them, "Am I being brainwashed?" Like, didn't that map look different 3 years ago? And they say, "Oh no, you're insane for even asking that."
No, that's that's how it is here, and they had all the questions here are totally insane because what happened was there was the protests this is an ongoing effort from an ongoing network of people for like the past 20 years, and there's new faces, and there's they invent issues or they jump on issues or they hyperventilate minor issues into big ones. So like I said, there's real issues with food costs. There's real issues with housing costs. There is a youth unemployment and some things like that. But the thing is that the protest movement doesn't focus on all of these things that like the traditional left or the traditional liberal or the traditional mass movement in other countries, when they're like have the aroma of legitimacy to them. Usually there's a housing crisis, there's an employment crisis, migration, something that's like a huge issue. These are like just a collection of annoyances and grievances that these people have, and then they hyperventilate about things that are apolitical. Like there was a construction accident or a poorly built structure that was rebuilt. Part of it was rebuilt and it collapsed, killing 15 people. It was a tragedy here. And some months before that, we had a Columbine situation, which was really unusual for us. And the circumstances were really strange because of the foreigners that were interacting with the minor and the father that suddenly took them to gun training and a lot of weird things. But we had like a Columbine school shooting situation. And that was, there's all these different stories, and I don't mean to say they're stupid, but they're not ones that are legitimate to bring like protesters to bring the state down. Like after Columbine happened, you might have had some outcry about gun control or about teen angst or something like that movie Heathers. But other than that, it's like you don't have protests on Washington Mall to bring down the government, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
just understand like the blown out of proportionedness of all of this stuff. Like before that, like a couple years before that, there was like an illegal structure on the waterfront that was a bar. It was just like a sports bar that didn't have a license, and it was on the waterfront. It wasn't even that popular. And they got like a 4-month notice that they're going to clear it out because they developed this area of the river into real estate. So they got rid of this building, and people made a protest movement about that. And the bar happened to be owned by gypsies, Roma. So they made it be like, this is a racism against Roma and people. And all of these protesters are totally disingenuous. They just find the issue, not the hundreds of thousands or the 10. I'm talking about the organizers. The organizers are totally not like realistic or legitimate in their point. They have an agenda, and they find every little issue, and then they bring as much social attraction or whatever education to that subject until they mobilize a lot of people, and they're able to mobilize a lot of people because it's actually, even though it seems like an anti-government protest, because these NGOs are building dual power institutions within the country, these are protests issued by the pseudo government or the para government. Like, in other words, for a country like Serbia to qualify for, let's say, some IMF loan, right? They have to have a budget that the IMF can say, oh, you can pay back the loan. So, for example, to make that budget, they might say, oh, we're going to have to cut from, let's say, high school or college, or from healthcare, like 1% here. And then the way that it works, as you know, like the ecosystem of color revolutions is that then the UN agencies or these NGOs, these Soros, NED, USAID agencies come in to fill as like a stopgap, to fill the very thing that the country was forced to do by the same entity called the banking sector of the same entity, by the IMF. So then these institutions exist in Serbia that are actually civil society organizations, professional associations, public health related things and other things, education, health, infrastructure. And they are calling for the protests. So it's like, like in Cuba, you might have like a May Day march, and it's like, oh, do they support the government? It's like, well, the government told them to go march, like it's May Day.
So technically,
Cuba.
Yes, they support the government. Yeah.
So technically, yes, they support having a job. So likewise, these Soros, pseudo government, it's like state within a state, or like dual power institutions, like they're all protesting because it's like their job to do this now, a lot of them. And then other people don't know that. So you just need like a critical density of like 5,000 or 10,000 core protest fanatics, and you can pick up another 30,000 for different events.
Yep.
And didn't you have a scandal where one of the leading voices of the Serbian anti-Vučić protests was calling for like sacred sacrifices or something like?
Oh yeah.
What was her name? Like this girl was over the top.
The government was supposed to come down on March 15th, on the Ides of March. It was supposed to come down, and it was a year ago. That's when the big Hungarian protest happened. I think the war in Syria or the Tahrir Square in Egypt kicked off on the 15th. Like Ides of March 15th, bombing of Yemen. So there's something about this date is interesting to me. It was the assassination of Julius Caesar.
The murder of Julius Caesar, yeah. Right.
So you can see the analogy to Vučić and whatever. So Vučić gave a speech on the 14th saying, tomorrow supposedly I'm going to be overthrown. We'll see what happens. So the 15th went, and nothing happened. And the reason is that the state and the police agency started to go after the illegal parts of these color revolution organizations. So 2 days before, there was a planning committee of the students' plenary for the protests on the 15th that already took place. So this is before the 15th, and they're saying all kinds of things, and they're basically saying that there needs to be action, and there needs to be like someone will have to die, and they understood that if it bleeds, it leads. If it bleeds, it leads. Yep. And they also called for a number of other things. Anyway,
George Floyd.
Floyd.
That's how they started the color revolution in America, was George Floyd, right?
Precisely, 100%. So they knew they needed a George Floyd type of thing, and the Serbian police, military intelligence, civilian intelligence, and the police intelligence and police all had to coordinate together to prevent there being a death or murder on that day. Like, imagine how impossible to prevent anyone from being killed on that day. Like, that is such a task. So they prevented anyone from being murdered on that day. And the people that made that call, warrants were put out for their arrest on the evening of the 13th and the morning of the 14th, and they fled the country to Dubrovnik, Croatia. And so several of the leaders, Mila Pajic and others, left, or Pajic left the country, and others were arrested here. So a lot of the very radical elements were decapitated, you know. Like, I fully support people protesting. You understand? Like, this is not about people addressing grievances in public. This was about like radical elements that were controlling the narrative the whole time about how far to take the protest and where to go with it. So then they did do a provocation on the 15th where they claimed that a sound cannon was used, which was later debunked. And even the manufacturer of the sound cannon said that was not used here. So that was like a nice thing.
Okay, so actually that was a big question. I really, man. No, dude. So I was dying to ask you about this. So in the mainstream media that I've looked at, they're always still pounding on the sound cannon was used by the big bad government to disperse the students. How evil is Serbia? Now, you've proven, or I think you've made a very good case why that's garbage, and you just alluded to it, but could you say a little bit more? Like, what evidence do you have to say that the sound cannon being used by the government fake?
We did a 5-minute video that showed all the CCTV camera angles from the time and the most important ones, and also how the crowd reacted. So, I mean, I'll build up to the pinnacle, but basically just point blank, no one touches their heads or their ears or anything. So there's no, you know, whether it was a bone conductive, whether it was subsonic, supersonic, sonic, whatever. Well, we didn't hear anything, so it would have been supersonic or subsonic, but we didn't hear anything. But people would still respond. Anyone that would later report traumas would have been, it's not like a cumulative effect. It's not radiation, it's sound, right? So you would have had to have trauma at the time that you're going like this to have, an acute trauma or develop a chronic condition later. It would have been something that you experienced at the time. It's not, like I said, it's not poison, it's not radiation, it's sound. So people did not react like to sound, number one, period. That's it. However, we do see where the stampede began, because that's on CCTV footage. And you see the yellow vest wearing organizers coming out from an alley, like they had a huddle or something. They come out from a narrow street or alley. They're taking off their vests, and then they start running at the crowd. And maybe we don't have audio, but maybe they have blowing whistles or shouting, a car's coming or who knows what. But as they start to run and stampede, that creates what's called a Mexican wave. It's a phenomenon. I know I'm Mexican, but it's called a Mexican wave. And that's the phenomenon. It's people are moving at the speed of human reaction to other people moving. You see, sound travels at 330 meters per second at sea level, which means that anything sound would have been heard simultaneously by like everyone, and they would have reacted the same way at once. What you see is a scattering of a stampede of startle, of what's it called, the startle reflex or the stampede reflex. People are moving towards the street. And why to the street? Like, is the sound wave not work on the street, only on the sidewalk but not on the street, or on the street but not the sidewalk? It's because they thought a car was coming. And then we found a reporter from N1 from CNN, so it's their guy who's there at the scene saying it looks like people thought a car was coming and they jumped out of the way. That's what his take was. So we put that all in this little 5-minute video, like 2 days after the event. And it was, the reference to it was picked up by the country's leading historical newspaper, Politica, established 1909. And so we've been doing our work to kind of debunk these color revolution narratives. You know, it's really hard, Gordon and Matt, because we're not against people protesting. Like parliamentary politics doesn't always work, and sometimes people have to take direct action, but it cannot be illegal and it cannot be irrational. And civil disobedience, like the type that Martin Luther King, Jr. taught us about, like you accept the arrest. Like that is part of the civil disobedience is to accept the arrest, not to then claim the arrest as sign that the government has to come down. Anyway.
Or fight the police. It's like if civil
right,
disobedience,
or them, right, or shoot at them. Right?
The key term is civil disobedience.
Civil disobedience,
otherwise,
right.
you're just engaging in violent revolution,
correct,
or anarchy or whatever.
Right.
But this is from those degenerates over at NPR. This is from today, and they're still pushing the sound cannon narrative, and they're still trying to convince everybody that a sound cannon was used. And I mean, what you're describing almost kind of sounds like that Savannah syndrome thing that people were talking about in Cuba. And I don't know if that's what happened, but I'm just saying, like, there are other explanations other than a sound cannon, and it could be something clandestine, something that has nothing to do with the Serbian government, right? I mean,
yes, the Savannah syndrome. So what's interesting that you say that is that a former U.S. attaché, I don't know if he was from the first Trump administration or what, but he also was quoted in Politica because his expertise is in Savannah syndrome, right? So he described that, hey, something going on could actually be something from Savannah, like reference to Savannah syndrome. So one of America's lead experts on Savannah syndrome actually spoke to this subject and was quoted in Politica saying sound cannon was not used.
Interesting. Okay, well that's great to hear. So, and it's worth noting, by the way, that President Trump said yesterday that he really wants to defund these people. So he's like, he was straight up asked, "Are you going to defund NPR?" And he said, "Yeah, I'd really like to. That'd be great." So hopefully they do. But I will add a little bit of coloring to what you were saying, because like we are in complete agreement with you, and this audience is well versed in the nefarious side of protesting, right? But we mentioned George Floyd. We mentioned the summer of 2020. That was a color revolution in America, of course. I like where I live in Richmond. At the time, I was working downtown, and when this all started, I don't want to give too many specifics out of respect for my friend, but I ran into a friend at a convenience store, and he was working for a law firm that was connected to the things that were happening, but he had nothing to do with it. He was like, "I do divorces, man. Like, I didn't even know we were involved in this stuff." But long story short, these protesters came to his office and tried to burn the place down, and were trying to like literally they're trying to like smash the windows and kill. And they were holed up in there. The protesters cut the electricity to the building. So this is June or July, so it's 100 degrees outside, and they had no air conditioning. The police were standing outside; they could see them behind the protesters, just watching the whole thing happen. The police station was only a few blocks away. You could easily walk there, and they were holed up in there for like a few hours, and they all thought they were going to die because these people were like, "We're going to kill you when we get in there." And the only reason they were allowed to leave is because some random woman showed up and said, "Let them all leave." Like somebody, like she cited some person's name and said, she said that they can go. This was like a mob hit, like literally a mob hit. And so when I ran into him, this was like the next day or a few days later, he was telling me about this, and my jaw was on the floor. And obviously, like, I was involved, like, tracking all this stuff. I wasn't doing what we're doing now, but and he was like, "Yeah, do you want to come back to my office?" And like we went and hired some special forces guys to like run security for us. And I walked back there, and these guys are, retired. So I was talking to like the security guards, and I was just like earnestly asking questions. And what the guy told me, I mean, who knows how accurate he was, but what the guy told me is he was like, "Look, because I think he could tell that I wasn't like a total noob at this stuff. Like, I'd done some research." He said like, in his opinion, what he thought that the people who were organizing these riots across America were the same guys that were used to organize the revolution against the Syrian government in 2012. That's what he told me. And the way he explained it to me, and the way that, like, between his explanation and my research since then, it seems to me this is what they do, is they get these, I don't know if they're special operations guys, if they're ex-military or whatever, but like special forces, but they go in and they organize at a very high level. They organize the people on the ground. The people on the ground are like the Soros people, you know, like the layer beneath them. And those guys are like, their faces probably aren't being seen anywhere on the street. Like I doubt those guys are anywhere where you're going to catch them on camera. Then you have people who I think are like at the NGO level, the Soros people. These are the career protesters that you described, the people
Right.
who follow the money around, who travel around wherever the NGOs are giving out money, you know, $30 a day, $100 a day, whatever, to come protest. And they're more organized. They're more like trained up on what to do. And then those are the people who kind of like get all of the useful idiots out of their houses
Right.
and into the street, who
That's
are
it.
already antagonized by the news cycle, and they're already whipped up. They just need a target to direct their fury at, right? And it's like, so you have these multiple layers that are all working at the street level, but it's all being orchestrated by effectively like military type planning. I mean, not to say it's a state, not to say it's a state military doing it, but it's people of that caliber who are organizing the whole thing.
Yeah. It's, you know, in Serbia, one of the debates is whether the protests are genuine or whether they're domestic or whether it's like foreign NGOs. And like a lot of the protesters, of course, don't know. But there's like a gray in here. There's like some nuance in this because, you know, one of the first, you know, color revolutions of the post-Soviet world was right here. It was actually the color revolution in October 2000. So like this was the one that removed Milosevic. And now, of course, as a research question, it became interesting later in time, like how do you do a color revolution in a country that's already had a color revolution? You know, like this is the question that came in Ukraine because they had the Orange Revolution, you know, 15 years ago. And then they had the Maidan like 9 years ago, right? So didn't people learn, or how do you do it differently? Or how do you make it more real? Or how do you get, you know, past people's spidey senses and make it, you know, implant the right way, like to take, so the patient accepts the organ or whatever, right? Like, so it's really weird. Like in Serbia, though, is unique from any other country because the anti-Milosevic efforts required the building of cadre in Serbia that became a professional class that then went global. So you had like, of course, you have the ideas of Saul Alinsky and others, and then you have like Gene Sharp and the Canvas and Albert Einstein Institute later. They create Otpor in, you know, with the fist that everyone sees in Egypt and later everywhere that fist was, that started with Otpor in Serbia. So like Srđan Popović and those ground and, you know, kind of strategic planners and thinkers, you know, are Serbian, but they went to Egypt, they went to Libya, they went to wherever, you know, Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey, Ukraine, etc. Like they're used wherever. So, you know, to say that the protests here are actually indigenous and not like foreign organizers is a little misleading because it's like, yeah, because we're the exporters of that. Like the experts in color revolution are in Serbia, you know, like, so we have enough brain. We don't need we are the foreigners that make the color revolutions in other countries. You see what I'm saying? Like, so
it's like a transnational cartel hiring mercenaries to go in there who then recruit professional protesters from the population who are willing to show up somewhere for whatever, $30, $100, whatever it is. And then those people, like I said, get the masses out, and then they can point a camera at it and be like, look at this organic populist uprising against the government, right? I mean,
it feels that way, you know. And like you said, there's people that are paid organizers, there's people that, you know, have to show numbers, they have to get, you know, 100 people to show up to earn their whatever. And then you have the infiltration of civil society where, you know, you go into, let's say, a dental clinic and it's not a government one, but it's also free and it feels like a government one, right? But then there's like posters that are like, read about how Vučić is a dictator. And you go, So you might get like propagandized through using these services in civil society. And then the employees there also like are become true believers. They're like, we're doing this because the government's a dictatorship. And it's like, you're doing this because the government said to come in and do it actually. But, you know, they get a narrative, they get a conflict theory narrative about something that's very functional.
Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, did I ever tell you guys about our experience in Hong Kong in 2019?
No.
Mm-mm.
Oh, were you
was
in
like-
Hong Kong in 2019?
Yeah, we went in for we were invited to speak or to participate. We didn't speak, but we participated at a Belt and Road summit. And the question was like, is Hong Kong going to play a role within the Belt and Road Initiative, or is it too much of a liability? You know, it's known as the CIA of the Pacific, and it has that reputation for a good reason. There's still a bunch of, you know, HSBC still manages with the Standard and Charter like 2/3 of the Hong Kong currency emissions. The judicial system is still staffed by a ton of British nationals. So it's not really a part of China in that sense. That it still maintains its British imperial heritage in many ways. And so the question was, is the Greater Bay Area, which is like a big mega infrastructure plan, gonna take that area's identity, or is it going to be overthrown? And is there going to be like a liberate Hong Kong, bring Hong Kong back under the British protectorate orientation, which was what we saw directly when we walked in. It was like September 2019. We ended up showing up at the peak of this color revolutionary effort, and so I saw every night we'd look out our Airbnb windows at streets just packed. We're in downtown Hong Kong. You just see it packed with protesters, but waving British and Hong Kong flags, calling for bring us, Britain save us. The U.S. Their American flags calling for the USA to militarily intervene to save them.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was really surreal. So, and then we're watching Western media talking about this as a peaceful protest, but I'm in Hong Kong, and I could see like fires being lit, buildings being burnt down, people are being lit on fire, literally like anti-protest old guys are like going up arguing with these young anarchist idiots who light the old patriots on fire. And that's what the sort of thing we're seeing from local media. And then the Western media is just still making it sound like it's a Gandhi movement. So point is, at one of the Airbnbs we stay at, where there's like a lot of people who are at this Airbnb, and we didn't really plan it out too well. We didn't use Airbnbs very much. We're still newbies at that. And we're noticing that there's a lot of people coming in with girls every night, some locals, but there's a couple of white people too. And one night I'm having a beer, doing a little bit of reading. And this white guy around our age walks in. It's probably like 11 p.m. He's all sweaty, and we start chatting a little bit for the first time about, hey, where are you from? He's like, oh, I'm from. I think he said he's from Seattle or something. And he's like, where are you from? And I'm just like, I'm here visiting friends. I'm just trying to keep like a blank profile.
Yeah.
And he starts talking about what he does. I'm like, what do you do? And he's like, well, I have a really flexible job, and he's talking about how
I work for the State Department.
He's got this amazing. Well,
he says what?
Implicitly, right? Like he's talking about how he works for a Silicon Valley startup firm, and it gives him the freedom to like really pursue his passion. So like 90% of his time, he can just fly around the world. And I'm like, where do you fly to? Like, what do you do? And he's like, well, to geopolitical hotspots, like where there's a lot of love for freedom and that needs a little bit of help. And I'm like, well, okay, but you're working for a startup. And he tells me that they don't seem to really do much at the Silicon startup, but they employ him and they fly him around.
Cases, yeah.
And I'm like, how did you get this job? Like, what's your skill set? Like, are you a software developer or something? He's like, no, but I think somebody found my talents when I was part of the Occupy Wall Street Seattle branch. Or no, Florida, that was it, Florida branch. And I'm like, oh, really? Yeah, he's like, I was one of the key organizers for that. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So they just saw that you had organizing skills, organized mass behavior, and then you got picked up at this dream job of yours where you don't actually seem to have to do a job except to get flown around the world to geopolitical hotspots where there's a love for freedom, where you can offer some contribution with your organizing skills.
It doesn't even make sense outside of a color revolution narrative. Like it's like walking into a room and there's like a body on the ground and a guy holding a knife with blood on it. He's like, yeah, it's his dream job. I don't know. I just, that's hilarious.
I asked the guy, like, do you feel like you might sometimes be perhaps used by the CIA or something? And he's like,
Yeah.
well,
Did
I
you
thought
ask him
about
that?
it, but I did. Because
You thought
we were
about it.
speaking the same language. At a certain point, I brought up Gene Sharp, and he could see that I've also read Gene Sharp. So he's thinking that I'm a white guy in Hong Kong. I might be there for the same reasons he's there. So he starts getting
So he was fishing to see if you were there for the same reason. Like, do we work for the same people? Do we work for the same startup?
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah,
at a certain point, I was like, this is enough information. And my Cynthia and I, we basically have a little chat, and we're like, we're gone. And we just break our contract, and we're like, we're out of here. This is not. I don't want to be in this area.
Wow.
So we bailed. But yeah, it gave us a sense, because every time you would look at one of these mass, multi-thousand body, mostly young idiot movements or groups that would be marching down the street, there would always be these control nodes, these white guys, usually in mask, but they're white guys, sort of flagging, controlling, herding like sheepdogs the group.
They're the ranchers on the cowboys on the horse, and everyone is the cattle, and they're herding the cattle into the place they need them to be, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you just need, like you said, just a few, right? And then you can set the tempo. If you just got a few, and all of a sudden you can get a herd to move in a direction, and then all of a sudden you ensure that just those whatever 1%, maybe half of them start getting really violent, throwing Molotov cocktails, and the 99% who came out just to like express their anger at whatever type of corruption in the government or whatever, all of a sudden they're now being considered as part of the mob demanding the government be taken down. And they're being associated with Molotov cocktails and the rocks at the police. And all of a sudden, some of them might get into it, even though they don't even want to. That's not why they came out. And it's an amazingly disgusting piece of science.
You just described January 6th, by the way. That's basically what January 6th was. I mean, like who doesn't understand that? Of course, like every startup has, these guys that they can keep on salary, and they don't really need them to do anything, and they can just fly them around the world, like have fun and do whatever they want. I mean, that's what every startup has, that built into their budget. I mean,
it's almost the point of having a startup. But
that's the whole point of having a startup, is so you can just do whatever you want and get paid to do absolutely nothing. Right. But that is so funny that you say that, because back then, like the first Trump administration, I was basically doing what we're doing now, like tracking this stuff like obsessively. I just didn't have like a platform to like talk about it, so I was just kind of like internalizing it, or just like unloading it on my wife every single night, and she'd be like, please stop talking. But
go public. Write about it, go public.
But I remember the Hong Kong thing so well, because to the CIA's credit, they did a very, very good job of tapping into like the Djangoism of like the MAGA movement, and tugging at the heartstrings of the movement, because like all those people were waving the American flag and like dressed up like the Statue of Liberty and saying, Donald Trump, please come save us, which confused me, because I remember the time I had like convinced myself that Donald Trump and Xi were basically working together to take down the people who wanted to kill Donald Trump. Right. I mean, like it seemed very obvious to me that Xi and Putin and Trump were basically had the same enemies, and they shared the same interests. And it's like, why wouldn't they, figure out a way to work together, even if it wasn't out in the open, to like corral these people to justice? So Gordon, it didn't make like none of it made sense to me.
How did you put that? I mean, I agree with you. How did you put that together?
Well, I mean, there were a few things that I noticed. I would say that, the tariff war with Xi, I mean, obviously Trump's like optics and like the way he treated Xi in public, and the way he like considered him a close friend, that was a tell. But you kind of have to take all of that with a grain of salt, because he does the same thing with people that he obviously like can't stand because they want to kill him. Like he's very good at getting along with people who obviously hate him, because he's a good diplomat, he's a good businessman. But the tariff war thing was in 2018 was very, very eye-opening for me, because I was working in construction, in architecture, and we would have these construction reps come in, these material reps, to sell, like to give us lunch and be like, hey, when you're designing a building, specify these materials on the outside of the building, right? And all their stuff was made in China, and they were all freaking out when the tariffs were announced because their stuff was going to be marked up, 25% against all their competitors. And so I learned firsthand from these people, because they were all thought they're going to lose their jobs, and they were just like being earnest with us. What ends up happening is all these companies have to move their operations either to America. They either move to America, or they move to Brazil or Mexico or Canada. And a lot of like the clients, many of them are, big corporate conglomerates that are operating across the country. They're telling the architects, only specify things that are made in America. We can't afford delays from this stuff, like from this tariff stuff. So it was a net positive for America. But what I was also realizing from talking to these people was that it was also beneficial for China, because these people were not being well treated. Like the people on the manufacturing end, like they were not well treated. This is like slave caste level, sweatshop conditions. You hear the stories about Apple and like the people, like the suicide nets and all that, like those kind of companies. And it dawned on me that those people were no longer going to be forced to work in conditions, because the corporations that were forcing them to work in those conditions couldn't afford to continue manufacturing in China. And so like once I started looking at it from that perspective and like understanding that maybe the tariff war wasn't like a knife in the side of Xi in China, maybe it was actually benefiting China somehow, then I started going back and looking through all the news stories through that lens and trying to understand, all right, if I'm a Chinese nationalist who actually wants to make a better China, how would I look at this news story? And I got myself in the habit of looking at like every single news story through that perspective, not only from China, though, from Russia, from Italy, from every perspective. Like if you're just an earnest populist nationalist who doesn't want to be controlled by a transnational cartel, how do I look at this news story? Like, does this narrative make sense? And what I found is it became very easy to understand when a narrative was designed to make us think a certain way, and when it was designed to foment tribalism, balkanization. I mean, balkanization at the transnational level, where you're trying to turn country against country, right? You're trying to get one country like America to be in favor of going and bombing China in order to liberate Hong Kong, for example. And this clip went viral. I don't know if y'all remember this. I want to play this real quick. It's a 13-second clip. You might remember this, Matt. Do you remember this from that era?
China. We need independence.
Yep. And what's your message to? Have you seen Donald Trump? Do you think he should step in?
Donald Trump don't trust China. China is asshole.
So like that thing like went viral, and everyone thought it was so funny, and that guy became kind of like that guy became like a meme celebrity.
Yeah.
But now in hindsight, like knowing everything that I know now, I'm almost positive that guy worked for the CIA. That guy 100% probably worked for the CIA. That guy definitely worked from a startup from Seattle, and was in country.
Yeah, that is pretty funny. That was pretty. That guy earned his paycheck. He earned his paycheck.
Yeah.
I gotta say that.
Yeah, he did the job.
Yeah,
he landed it. Yeah.
That
so
video.
We got a thing here. Sure. Yeah.
What's up?
Well, yeah. I mean, and it was also in 2014, right? Like there was a previous Hong Kong protest in 2014 that failed, and they tried again in 2014, then 2019. Like that involved.
I
Like,
remember
Ukrainian
guys. I remember seeing Ukrainian Nazis in protests in either Hong Kong or Taiwan. I remember.
Yeah, it was Hong Kong they were brought in, maybe Taiwan too, but yeah, that's right. And in Taiwan in 2014, after the Ukrainian Maidan was finalized, they did the Sunflower Revolution in Taiwan, where they ousted the KMT government that was about to finalize an economic trade deal with mainland China. Yeah. And they were ousted because they were too pro having good relations with mainland China. So they were ousted with these young, useful idiots calling, like rallying around the Sunflower, taking hold of the Taiwanese parliament. And then you had a complete CIA puppet regime implemented, calling for massive independence, separatism. and inviting Green Berets to come to Taiwan to train the military and do all of these, unilateral deals militarily, even though they're still legally a part of China, which every country except for 13 countries, but every country in the world except for 13 acknowledges Taiwan as a part of China, an autonomous province, but still a part of China. So you can't legally do military deals with private contractors from a country that's targeted you for, an oncoming inevitable war, especially. But that's exactly what they started doing when at the same time as they did the Ukraine thing. So yeah, the fact that that's all it came back again in 2019, and it's all tied to the same tactic. It's really a simplistic formula, but they get away with it time and time again, eh?
Yeah, it's so obvious to me that now that Ukraine is a proxy state that is basically used as like a bludgeoning tool against Russia. The same way I'm convinced now that Taiwan is a proxy state that's used as a bludgeoning tool against China. The same thing with South Korea, North Korea. That there was a fascinating interview I saw that Colonel McGregor did with Judge Napolitano months ago, like November, where he basically explained, it may have even been more recent than that, but he explained that the actual State Department puppet state is actually South Korea, not North Korea, which I thought he didn't say it wasn't North Korea. I mean, I'm sure North Korea to some extent has been a puppet state, but he was saying that it's actually South Korea that's used as like a puppet state to foment this Hegelian dialectic with North Korea. And the purpose, of course, is to have this ever-present threat of war. And then that's how you justify this massive military presence in that area, which justifies the massive military budget. And it also keeps everyone on pins and needles. So then if you ever need a conflict to break out, everyone's in place and the pieces are ready to go. And you can look at any theater and probably find similar conditions.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the long and the short of it. I saw a headline on RT. I haven't had a chance to look into it. There's an interview I think Sergei Lavrov just did about the Riyadh USA talks, or the Russia USA talks we did in Riyadh. I guess he did commentary on it. I look forward to watching that. But in the headline, it mentioned that he described that same dynamic for Greenland. He said that Greenland is a proxy state that's used to that's used basically by NATO against Russia. So it's the same. It's like the same dynamic is everywhere, but it's just they change the labels, they change the branding on it, and so it looks like it's something different, but it's actually the exact same thing. And it's really
if you look at a map, if you look at a map of the Earth from the North Pole as the center, by azimuthals, you see that Greenland, that ring in Russia, and Greenland and Alaska and northern Canada, it's all, and Finland, it's all right there. They're very close together on the top of the planet. It's a fascinating thing. And when we think about deconfliction and the U.S. trying to totally make a 180 on policy with Russia, no longer anti-Russia. Well, how do you what you're saying is profound. How do you guarantee that? Well, you can't guarantee that if the King of Denmark has that turf right there. They can put nukes aimed at Russia right there, So it's the idea of, the Europeanization of NATO, or the end of NATO, or the U.S. backing out of NATO, right? There's a good, you can really see, how close these are. Look at Greenland. It's right there.
It's right there. I mean,
yeah.
It's right. And that's, Matt, what makes the announcement Trump teasing about doing the a joint partnership in the Arctic with Putin so profound, right?
I often say that, President Trump is the best American president that I've lived through in my lifetime. And it's not because he had a lot of competition, though. So I just want to clarify that,
Yeah, right.
But it's it's the best that we've had so far. I hope it's good enough, but it's I'm very concerned about Yemen and some other things, but on the whole, it's the least bloody and the most forward moving on the things that need forward movement on. Since I'm a baby.
Yep.
Well, I definitely, I'm definitely hungry to get some meat on the bones. There's been discussion now about economic cooperation on the Arctic front. There's no details yet, but there's at least the words and the tempo being set for building up some trust. So I'm really hungry to see whether things like that Arctic, the Alaska to Alberta rail line that Trump advocated towards the end of his first presidency is going to be revived. Things like that really make me hungry, and I'm gonna sort of withhold my enthusiasm until I start seeing some practical ideas being put into motion. But it's definitely there's a lot of grounds for optimism right now. But I'm curious, what are your guys' takes on the messaging that King Charles 5-6 days ago put out the offer for the USA to become an associate member of the Commonwealth?
He's
of
trolling.
Britain.
He's trying to be Trump.
Yeah, you're definitely trolling, right?
Hold that thought. Let before you answer that, think about your answer. Let's do this ad, and then we'll do that, and then we'll do rants and start to wind down.
Yeah, good idea. We've been going for a while. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me
cliffhangers. Wait, I need to make sure I have the one second.
I can read it. Okay. I'll read it. Now's the perfect time to secure your home and your loved ones. Get a free ADT smart home security system valued at $1,200 from ADT authorized provider Safe Streets. Plus, get a Google Nest doorbell camera at no cost and a $200 Visa gift card from Safe Streets, the most trusted name in home security with more than 106,000 4.9-star Trustpilot reviews. Visit getsafestreets.com/Badlands or call 925-529-6541. That's 925-529-6541 to speak to a representative today. $99 customer installation charge and purchase of new monitoring service required for their termination fee apply. There we go.
Nice. Well done.
Okay. Thank you.
Joaquin, all yours.
All right. Trolling, not trolling. Trolling? You say trolling. You're on mute, by the way.
You're muted.
Totally muted. Yep. Mouth moving. That's all.
Wait.
He'll get it. He'll totally get this. I have full faith. All right. I said I have full faith. Don't leave me hanging with doubt in my faith.
Oh, wait. Can't unmute your guest there, Mike. Oh, it says your mic isn't connected. Huh.
Oh, the mic isn't connected. You can
try
read his lips or something? How do you do
that? No. It says that like when I put my mouse over his like there's a mute button for everybody. Like I can mute anybody, and it says oh wait, he's gonna back out and come back in maybe. Yeah.
Oh, probably. That's what I would do. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I mean,
Joaquin that he's trolling. Some people say he's trying to counter infiltrate to liberate the British Empire members from within. I'm a little bit more cynical. I think it's a trap.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Gordon?
Yeah. Here he is.
Oh, okay. All right.
There you go.
So leave it to
Take it away.
Yeah.
All right. Go. Do it.
What were we saying? We were talking about
King Charles.
King Charles. Yeah. Well, it's that I think it was hilarious. And then I saw like Alex Jones, who's like suddenly like slender and all yoked and stuff. He's like, if you ever, let me just tell you, it's going to be 1776 all over again.
Yeah.
And it was like, so there was this whole story. So I feel like King Charles was trolling because obviously what's happening is it's becoming clear that Trump is like not very good friends with the King of Denmark or the King of England. So there's some like they want to pursue some kind of Nazi liberal like Ukraine against Russia thing and whatever they have in their own, EU or whatever. But it's not, they want to keep this, they are fixated on Russia. And I think that King Charles is saying like, you can join us. And I don't think that that's like, I would say that when Biden made AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US, in my mind, this was compatible with Trump policy. I thought that was a very interesting thing. I thought the creation of AUKUS could be part of the end of NATO and connected to multipolarity. But King Charles saying this is definitely like, you can join us. I think it's definitely, just trolling, But the response, I think, clarified things for people. And I've never seen before, Gordon, so much focus on, like, in the American media, we saw for the first time what it looks like when a Canadian prime minister is sworn in. Like, we had never seen that. Why are we seeing this now on American TV?
I know.
Like,
yep.
And the King of England, and he's like, "All hail the King," and it's like, damn. So it is the King of England. Like, see, we were told it's not really. It's just symbolic. It's just he doesn't have power. It's its own country. It's a republic. Is it? It's a republic. Well, no, but yes, it's a constitution. And you're like, what's going on? And then it's like the mask comes off. Now Canadians know this, but is this now? I have to ask you, Matt, because now you're Canadian, and presently speaking, 90% of your population is now accumulated within 100 miles of the U.S. border. We're very paranoid about what you guys are prepared to do. We might have to take action. I wanted to ask you. In Canada, like, everyone knows that, like, that the prime minister has, like, the permission to use the seal on the matters relating to Canada from the King of England, right? Like, people know that generally, but you guys don't tell us that. Why do you guys lie to us, or why do you keep that from us? Why do you not tell us?
There was a film in 2004, South Park movie, and the solution is all in the South Park movie. It's all there.
Oh, that's great.
That's all that needs to be said.
All you need to say. Got it. No. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look.
Honestly, yeah, there you are. Commonwealth. Yeah, that's us.
Yeah, so I mean, like, when you look at this map, though, and you look at the storylines that are out there right now, and you look at the things that are happening right now and the issues that are at play. I mean, look at the countries that show up. I mean, so you have Canada. Like, these are all the countries in blue, by the way, are technically part of the British Commonwealth. So like the modern British Empire, so to speak, right? And so you have Guyana, which is the proxy state that is used to bludgeon Venezuela. So Maduro, right? You have a number of Caribbean countries. By the way, Marco Rubio, I believe, is in the Caribbean right now, doing something down there with alliance building. But I know that MBS was doing that 2 years ago, so he got beat to the punch. But Canada, you have Britain and Northern Ireland. You have Nigeria, which, we've been talking a lot on some of the other shows I do about Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso. You have Rwanda and the surrounding countries that are bordering the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's a major conflict right now. And the president is trying to get Trump to come in to help negotiate the whole thing. And it's all being run, by the way, through Qatar, which I think is fascinating because Qatar seems to be at the center of all these different mediations for diplomatic settlement. You have Cyprus, which is at this, kind of at the center of the Syria, Israel, Gaza thing, because Cyprus is being used as a staging ground for all that. India, I mean, that's a pretty big deal. And then a number of countries in the South and the Southeast Pacific. So I definitely think that you have all these like threads out there that seem really like disjointed and don't seem at all related, but I actually think they all are related. And obviously the common ground is the British Commonwealth. And then you have the whole Federal Reserve storyline that's playing out right now, and Trump and Elon teasing about auditing Fort Knox and figuring out what's going on with the Federal Reserve. That storyline is going to come to fruition, I feel like, at some point this year. It has to. The whole situation with the dollar has to kind of be resolved in the whole banking system, because that is running out of fumes to run on. And then I guess I'd say lastly, like, in summary, what I'm looking forward to most is there's a meeting that's supposed to happen. They haven't announced it officially yet, but they teased it back in January, and they've been teasing it ever since. But a meeting between Trump and Putin in Riyadh in mid-April. And I think that we're going to see Trump and Putin come together. And I don't know what's going to be announced from it. You would think it's going to be some sort of a resolution to the Ukraine situation, but I actually think it's going to be bigger than that. I think it's going to be maybe something about the Middle East, and maybe even something more than that. But you know, Putin invited Trump to come to the parade on what is it, May 4th? There's like a Russia Day parade.
Yeah, May 9th. Yeah, May 9th.
Yeah, like May 9th. That's right. I wouldn't be surprised to see Trump go to that. Like
I wouldn't be surprised either.
If the meeting in Riyadh like goes the way that I think it's going to go, I wouldn't be surprised to see Trump actually go to Russia and get like the red carpet rolled out for him, and then the media in America will literally have an aneurysm, and it will be awesome to watch. I mean, that's what I would do if I was Trump. I mean, just for the memes.
Yeah. Well, there's also the Elba Day event in, what was it, April 25th. I think it's April 25th. The meeting on the Elba between American and Russian soldiers that really consolidated the victory against fascism.
Right.
And I've been working with Dr. Edward Lozansky at really trying to build up a lot of momentum towards this. And he does this every year as a big event. So we're going to do something this April 24th or 25th in celebration of this. And it would be a really great opportunity. I think it was in 2020 or 2019 that Trump and Putin had a joint Elba statement calling for a revival of the spirit of the Elba. And again, it's a beautiful moment, right? When you, again, after grueling battles with Nazis, finally, after victory, little battles, but so much sacrifice. These soldiers finally met and embraced, and it just showcased the spirit and potential of what the world could have been after World War II, had the Russian, USA relationship not been sabotaged by the Dulles faction that was also later on to kill JFK. But had that not been sabotaged, it could have been a world of cooperation, progress, anti-imperialism in a wonderful way. But it didn't happen. So I think it would just be great if Trump was able to actually go and physically go, whether it's in April or whether in May 9th. But what a show of solidarity that would be with Xi Jinping.
There's just so much anti-Russian chauvinism. Like there's so much anti-Russian racism, in a sense, I guess. It's weird. Yeah. Like when you think about the decision makers, after World War II, that were saying, we need to take it all the way now against the Russians, right? Like Patton and all these guys and the establishment, Truman and all these people, these Cold Warriors. It's so weird. Like these people were born like in the 1860s and the 1870s, when they were in their 60s and 70s in the 1950s, It's crazy to think the world that they were born into, and that you could have like deep-seated, deep-rooted prejudices against any people like Russians, and it never be challenged because the world was so much bigger back then. And these people, like people making decisions about the Korean War, a lot of them didn't really consider Asians to be like human beings, like in the full sense of the word. Like they had still ideas from like 19th century racial theories and stuff. It's really, really weird in the American, when the ideas in the American establishment from the early, like before the mid-century time it's bonkers, man. Like it's very much like, wow, these people really, I mean, they weren't Nazis, but they had their own theories about hierarchy of races and stuff, I mean, they didn't treat Vietnamese like they were human beings, with the methods used in that war. Unspeakable.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm done. That's my rant. But I mean, just thinking about what you were talking about on Elba Day, and like what that represented and what it could have been. You know what I mean? And what I was flashing upon was like how Patton was such an anti-Russian racist. And, like in that Patton movie they made that like kind of takes his quotes and his best moments, and that Patton movie, they show that scene where he's there with the Russians and they're celebrating together, the Americans and the Russians, and he's like all mad about it, and he's like, oh, you know, like we made the wrong allies, like we should have allied with the Nazis against these guys. Like that's what he's saying in the movie, like while there. Supposedly a true quote, you know, supposedly a true quote. So that's the type of thinking that we got to root out, man.
Do you think they killed Patton, or do you think he died?
You know, I think they may have killed him, because how do you die from like a 5 mile an hour? How do you die from a fender bender? Like, I mean, I had a 1941 Plymouth business coupe, like a 2-door. So it wasn't a 4-door with like suicide doors, but I know what the back seat is like. And it's true that it can be a little hard, and the metal's on the inside of the car. So, you know, 5 or 10 mile an hour bump, I can see maybe, you know, hitting your head or something. I can see that. But I think he's like, Jesus, he's going to start World War III before World War II is over. Like, I think they were,
Sometimes I wonder if he. Sometimes I wonder if if he was basically given a stand down order. He was given an order that he didn't agree with at the end of World War II, and that drove him to start looking into things. And I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked deeply into Patton, so I don't really have a fully formed opinion on it. But I definitely think the circumstances of his death seem very suspicious, and it certainly seems like his worldview didn't align with the worldview that they necessarily were trying to cultivate, except for the fact that he recognized, or he viewed Russia as an existential threat. I mean, that seemed to be in alignment, but there are other elements of maybe he knew too much about World War II. Like, I don't know.
He would have known a lot. I mean, it's maybe he was threatening to talk or something, because they were like, he was a public face of the actual policy that the U.S. was pursuing, but he was saying the quiet part out loud and too soon. So it's actually like the U.S. would go on and do Operation Paperclip. The U.S. would go on and make NATO out of former Nazi generals and commanders and stuff. So that is like what Patton wanted, and it was against Russia. NATO was against Russia. So it is what. So was he like a premature NATO advocate or something? Like sometimes they talk about premature anti-fascist, you know? Was he a premature NATO advocate, or was he a premature Russophobe? Or was he threatening?
Yeah, I got the sense that he kind of went off the reservation. Yeah, I get the sense he went off the reservation too, and maybe was speaking out of line and moving things he's trying to create a tempo that was not supposed to be set so early in the game at that moment. So that's my take as well. Why'd they kill Mussolini? You know, was Mussolini like, why did Churchill approve the murder of Mussolini? Not necessarily for the same reasons as Patton, but it's not always the great heroes that get murdered.
Well, there was certainly, from what I've looked into, there certainly was animosity between the military leadership and the politicians in D.C. at the end of World War II, and the direction they thought the world needed to go. And it seemed like the military leaders had more of a respect for the sovereignty of foreign countries, whereas the politicians and the emerging intelligentsia or intelligence community seemed to see an opportunity to remake the world in their image. And that was where there was, especially when it came to the Arab question, because all of the military guys from World War II sided with the Arabs in the partition of Palestine. They all said, this is wrong. This is exactly what we just went and fought in Europe and the Pacific over. Why are we doing this? And they all were overruled. So
very interesting.
Did Patton have a say on the Middle East question?
That's a good question. I think he died in like 1945 or 1946. So it probably wasn't quite at the top of it probably wasn't quite the issue that but I haven't looked. I mean, I haven't really done the deep dive on Patton. So,
right.
Yeah, but I will say that this is a book that I've been reading, and I haven't finished it yet. I'm more than halfway through, but I started reading it on the way to GART a few weeks ago, and man, this thing has connected a lot of dots for me, because Robert Maxwell figured out how to wrap up. Figured out how to launder money and do all the banking stuff in Israel. But shit, I did not realize how late it was. We should probably wrap up.
Gentlemen,
right,
it's
cool.
been my pleasure. I want to thank you for having me on, and we got to talk about Yugoslavia, Serbia, and beyond, and even got into China and what else? A lot of things today.
A lot of things, man. Well, appreciate you coming on. We will absolutely have to have you back again. Yeah. Did you want to give your coordinates to tell people where to
Yeah,
find
you
you?
know what? I'm only on Telegram at New Resistance,
Sweet.
New Resistance, or the t.me/New Resistance, like right there under my name. That's it. I just keep it simple.
I
Done a lot
will.
of projects
Yeah,
in the
we'll-
past, but yeah.
Yeah, and like I
will-
said at the very beginning, Joaquin does some amazing geopolitical analysis. If you subscribe and follow New Resistance, t.me/New Resistance, which I'm sure Gordon was about to say he'll put in the comment section under this video.
Thank you.
You'll get almost daily updates, briefings, high quality, top-notch stuff that normally people would have to pay a lot of money for. You're going to get it for mostly free. But if you want to support Joaquin, you can do that too. I'm sure Joaquin will tell you all sorts of ways to do that if you go to his Telegram channel and write to him. But otherwise, yeah, man, thank you so much. This was really great.
Thanks
You
for having
clarified
me
a lot
on.
of
It's good to meet
ambiguities
you,
in my
Gordon.
mind.
See you again.
Yeah, man. Great to meet you. Look forward to having you back soon. And yeah, I will drop the link to your Telegram in the comments for anyone listening to this on record. And yeah, everyone, please hit the thumbs up, and we will see you next week.
Toodles.